Kלים, Perik Yud Ches, Mishnah Aleph. Okay, we're starting really in the second half of the Masechta, and this half actually, sorry to say, is actually harder than the first half. And Perik Yud Ches is some pretty difficult Mishnahs in this Perik. However, the first Mishnah is relatively simple. It's a gentle run-in. Says the Mishnah, Hashida. Now we've mentioned this rule at the beginning of Perik Tesvav, where we mentioned the rule that in the case of Kli Eitz, Kli Etzem, Kli Or, and Kli Zechuchis, they have a rule that they are compared to the sock, the sack. And the rule is, Ma sock nital til molev, just like a sock is able to be moved when it's full, and when it's empty, who add in all those other set, Oir and Eitz, primarily, which must have, we know it, they must have a Kli Kibble. It must be a Kli Kibble. And the kibble must be osui, the kabel. They follow the rule of sok, that they must be able to put things in and they must be able to be moved with the thing in it. The Mishnah said there in Perek Tesvav, if the kli is so big. Remember, this rule only applies to kli eitz and kli or, it does not apply to kli matchas. It doesn't have this rule at all. But the kli eitz, it's called the kli haba b'midah. If it's so big, it's machzik arboim sa'ah. The Mishnah said it is tahor. It is just not a kli kibble because it's so big it cannot be moved at all. So the question is, how do you measure if a kli is machzik aboyim sa'ah belach? It's got to contain 40 sa'ah. 40 sa'ah is 3 cubic amas. There's a machlokes b'shamai b'silil how these 3 cubic amas are measured. Say b'shamai. B'shamai omrim nimdedes mi befinim. This is the one you would have thought is the logical answer. You measure the inside capacity, you don't measure the thickness of the walls. Can the airspace inside contain 40 sa'ah? Which is the logical way of thinking about it. The Siddur say, this is a kula. They say, even if the inner space, the container part is not able to contain 40 sa'ah, but if you also include the thickness of the walls on the outside, with the thickness of the walls, the overall dimensions of the kli are such that it's got the measurements of 3 cubic amas, then it's considered to be a kli haba b'midah and is tahor. Actually, this is quite difficult because the whole point of kli haba b'midah is that it's not able to be moved when it's full. And if it contains 40 sa'ah, then it's too heavy to be moved. However, if we're including the thickness of the walls, that means inside it's actually containing a little bit less. So the Chazon Ish actually has a tzorach in on this, and then he says something like, it must be that this shear of Arboim Sa'ah is like halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and therefore the shear is said to include the thickness of the walls on the outside. Says the Mishnah, Moide me'elu ve'elu b'shamei b'sil l'moide shein ovei haraglayim v'ovei laz bezin nimdad. Although they are arguing about the inside cavity and the thickness of the walls, they both agree that the legs underneath on which the keli sits, the feet or the legs of the kli, and lazbes is the rim on top. You have the top of the cupboard, then you have a little jutting, a little like a zer, like a crown, jutting out on top. Everybody agrees that that's not part of the 40 sa'ah. Rabbi Yossi Yomer, he says, Moedim, they agree, sha'ovei haraglaim va'ovei lazbesin nimdad, it is nimdad. That means you're basically saying, B'shamai B'silul actually are not arguing about the ovei haraglaim and the ovei lazbesin, the thickness, the area of the thickness of the legs and the thickness of the rim on the outside is definitely included in the 40 sa'ah. That means if they're included, kol sheken, the thickness of the walls themselves are also included. If so, what Rabbi Yossi is really saying, that B'shamai B'silul actually don't have any machlokas at all. They say, both of them say, he's arguing completely on the Tanna Kama. He's saying that the inside capacity, plus the thickness of the walls, plus the volume of the legs, plus the ovei lazbezin, it's all included in the 40 sa'ah. There is actually no machlokas between B'shamai and B'silul. This is how the Chazon Ish learns the Mishnah, and the word moedim is lav dafka because actually they don't argue anywhere. But beineim eino nimdad. Tosfos Anshe Shem says that the word moedim goes on the word beineim. Although they agree with all that, they say that the beinehem, the area underneath the cupboard, in between the legs, you've got the base of the cupboard, underneath you have the legs. That airspace underneath the cupboard between the legs, that for sure is not included in the 40 sa'ah. He says, I agree. If the feet are a tefach high, therefore the airspace underneath is a davar choshuv, it's something separate, it's not bottled to the cupboard, to the chest, then it's not measured. Vim lav. If it is less than a tefach high, then that airspace, that area underneath the cupboard, becomes bottled to the cupboard, and that's also nimdad included in the shear of the 40 sa'ah. And then we're going to move on to Mishnah based, the famous Mishnah of Muchani.